welcome to a brand new episode of Rediscovered Movies. I'm your host, Nomfanelo. So, the film that I'll be discussing is The Guest. The Guest is a 2014 thriller film directed by Adam Wingard, who's known for directing films such as You're Next and Godzilla vs. Kong. The film stars Dan Stevens, Maika Monroe, and Lance Reddick. So here's the plot. A soldier, played by Dan Stevens, introduces himself to the Peterson family, claiming to be a friend of their son who died in action. After he's welcomed into their home, a series of deaths seem to be connected to his presence. So the film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival back in January 17th, 2014. It released in theaters on September 17th, 2014, where it opened at number 40 with just over $84,527. It was beaten by films including The Maze Runner, A Walk Among the Tombstones, which also starred Dan Stevens, and This Is Where I Leave You. It made $2.7 million during its theatrical release. It had a $5 million budget. In terms of reception, on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 92% critic score. Here's what they have to say with the consensus. Boasting enough intelligence to bolster its darkly violent thrills, The Guest offers another treat for genre fans from director Adam Wingard. The audience, however, gave it 69%. The film is available to stream on Amazon Prime, Shudder, Tubi, and Plex, and is also available on demand, so check your local provider. And just before I get into the movie, I do want to say that apparently a sequel is in the works. So here's how that was revealed. So back in April this year, Adam Wingard, he announced that he'll be releasing an album titled The Guest 2, which featured song titles and lyrics that hint at what happened to David following the first film. And in an interview, I think it was on Empire, he mentioned that a sequel is in the works with an actual project with Simon Barrett, who wrote the script for this movie with him. So it seems like it's in the works for sure, because I'm looking at an article on Screenwriter which came out back in May. Hang on. So So yeah, possibly with this sequel, if it were to actually come to fruition, it could possibly show David still hunting for Anna and Luke, or maybe it could show more of the origins of David's past, with the experiments with the KPG and his relationship with Caleb, the son of the Peterson family that was killed in action. So, because it may have to wait a while, because with Wingard and Barrett, they're busy with a Thundercats reboot and sequel to Face Off. And I saw also too that Adam Wingard, he's working potentially on a sequel to Godzilla vs. Kong with Dan Stevens as in the lead role. So hopefully it does come true with the sequel. So let's get into this movie. So first discoveries. So I first heard about the film when it premiered at TIFF, at the Toronto Film Festival at the time. So after when I heard the plot and the people involved and all that stuff, I became interested in the film. I kind of developed a crush on Dan Stevens because he's good looking, still is today. And I didn't know much about him as an actor. I didn't even know about him in Downton Abbey, which that's what he's prominently known for. And I was kind of surprised that he's British, again because I didn't know him. And when this movie was in theaters at the time, like I really wanted to see the film, but it seemed like it was only available with a limited release on the major cities, which were like, I'm assuming Montreal, Toronto, so forth. So it didn't show anywhere in Ottawa, to my recollection. Um, so I had to wait for the Blu-ray to come out, which I believe I bought back in January 2015. And usually, like when I buy like Blu-rays, like it's stuff that I've already seen that I really like. But since I was very keen on seeing the movie, I decided to buy it on the Blu-ray, which I rarely do. And honestly, like I instantly fell in love with this movie because I like how if we're looking at it as an action film, it's kind of like a very more like grounded low key that's not full of like action sequences for the sake of action sequences. They have a purpose to it, which I liked, and also to like we're going with the thriller and the horror aspect, yet those were engaging and fun to watch like as the story progressed. And rewatching it later, like I still like think the movie holds up. I really enjoy it, and clearly though, like it became popular throughout the years as it became available on streaming and on demand. And yeah, and it definitely does deserve a sequel because there are some unanswered questions. So let's go on to highlights. So right off the bat, like the movie has like a 80s feel to it, whether it was intentional or not. Because I would say like with like the visuals, like how like it was shot, like the score, which definitely has John Carpenter influence with the synths, like more like from like his horror stuff, like with Christine and the Halloween films, and like with the lighting choices, the soundtrack, like with like the indie slash like alternative songs, like I felt, yeah, like with all that combined, like it definitely feels like the director wanted to pay like homage like to like horror films or thriller films like from that decade. Like yes, like it's still like modern because obviously it's set like in the present at the time, but definitely like it has like a more like retro feel to it without looking too retro. The concept, like I also like because it focuses on like this on the guy like the guest with David, because we don't know like what his deal is. Neither does the family, because essentially like we learn more about him like as like Anna starts to dig into him. So it seemed like he has like good intentions because he wants to pay his respects to the family because he developed a bond with Caleb, I guess, during the military. But then clearly, like as events go on, like there's definitely more to his character than he's leading on. Because I like how like it's kind of like a bit blurred to like not fully show David like as the villain per se, like or as a complete monster, but definitely kind of like torn like with emotions because he seems like a nice guy, like he's very charming and all that stuff, but once like you like piss him off, like or if there's stuff that you learn that he doesn't want you to know, that's when you see like a completely different side to it. And honestly though, like yeah, like I like, yeah, Dan Stevens' performance as David, because I didn't know much like about him as an actor, but it seemed evident that this movie made him a star, even though this movie didn't do well at the box office at the time. Because even though like he's known for his work as Matthew Crawley in Downton Abbey, like clearly like he wanted to play like against type to like kind of shed like the good guy image that he had in the show and try something different, which I think works. So because it seemed like after this movie he kind of got more prominent work in projects such as Legion, High Maintenance, Eurovision, and Gaslit, to name a few. And yeah, like I found like yeah, he did a great job because like those piercing blue eyes, the dirty blonde hair, and like the southern accent, like kind of like makes like women to like fall in love with him, and like for men, I guess, to respect him or maybe to be jealous of. But once it comes to him being like menacing and manipulative, like in the later half of the movie, that's like, when things start to get real. And yeah, also too, I want to mention this is the third Dan Stevens film that's featured in the podcast because you had Colossal back in season one, and I'm Your Man, which came out a couple weeks ago. So yeah, like obviously with this podcast, big fans of Dan Stevens. And I liked how like with his character, like he never blinks like when it comes to the close-ups. I guess like he wanted to show that like David is not human, or that like I don't know, like he's not normal, which is clear like as it goes on. And yeah, like that's when you kind of like, from at least for me, start to feel like the thrills and the shingles and all that stuff. And like with the bathroom scene, like when Anna knocks on the door to take the shower, I found, yeah, like at the time, like it was quite like fascinating because clearly like it's a money shot where he's wearing nothing but a towel. He has like his abs like exposed, like the wet hair. Honestly, like the ladies, including myself, instantly fell in love with him with that moment. Because I wondered though, like with that scene, like if it was shot either earlier during production or if it was like one of those final um, scenes that they did during production. But yeah, either way, like it's still quite charming and all that stuff to watch. And it seems very evident that Dan Stevens, he really worked hard with his transformation for the role because it was nice. Like for those that are familiar with Downton Abbey, you get to see him like stretch out, in roles that are not similar to Downton Abbey. Also, too, Maika Monroe as Anna, like I felt for me, she also stood out because it's interesting that she has like the side cornrow braids, like with the curly hair like exposed, like flowing, because there's like a shot like where we see a close up of her like staring at David during like their showdown. I loved like how the hair like is covering like one side of her face. We only see like the one eye, like as like the part of her hair is at the side. Like, yeah, that was a cool shot because I like how her character like she seems to be like a rebellion in a way, but she does have like a softer like side to her. It seems clear that yeah, like she wants to be like independent by having time with Zeke, who's not really the ideal boyfriend, at least according to Spencer. And like yeah, like clearly like yeah, she does make her presence known when it comes to like confrontation, but it's also nice to see like her vulnerable side to it. And it seemed like yeah, with this movie she kind of like also got more prominent work and kind of became like a scream queen because she's done work such as It Follows, Independence Day Resurgence, which I do not recommend, The Stranger series that was on Quibi, and Watcher, which I do recommend you guys check it out on VD wherever it's available. But yeah, like it's nice to see her like after this doing more leading roles because she does deserve it. And the performances from the rest of the cast is also solid too, like with the parents, and also too with Lance Reddick as the head of this mysterious military group. Also, too, another aspect I liked is that how like grief was a prominent theme because it shows here like with the family they kind of like have their different ways of processing. I would say like with the mother Laura, like I think she out of the members, I think she's kind of shows her emotions more like openly to an extent, because we see like at the beginning like she's quite emotional, like when she's talking with Spencer before he leaves, before David arrives. But then like we see like, she tries to hold it in, like just for the sake of keeping everyone together. And Spencer, he always like wants a beer, which is quite hilarious, but also too it kind of shows that maybe he has a drinking problem. Like we don't see him like as an alcoholic per se, but yeah, there's definitely some concerns with his character. With Luke, like he's kind of like quiet, like and shy, like he keeps to himself, and he has like he wears a lot of hoodies and has a terrible like Justin Bieber esque like hairstyle, but a bit more shaggier. Like from, if you remember with Bieber, like when he was younger back in like the early like 2010s, like I thought, yeah, that hairstyle is terrible. And like with Anna, like she like, spends time in a room when she's at home, or like we see her spending time like with her boyfriend Zeke and Kristen as she's working at the restaurant as a waitress. So we see, yeah, like they all kind of like show how they're processing stuff differently. Either like some like they move on, while others like they're still like clinging to Caleb's death. I liked also too, David always seems to have an answer to resolve like a situation, whether it's good or bad. Like for instance, example is that after when like Luke beats up a bully, like in self-defense, like in the classroom, like he is at the principal's office, and then David arrives with Laura to talk to the principal. And so at this point the principal wants to expel Luke, even though Luke was doing this in self-defense. And David like convinces the principal to give him after school detention, because he pretty much says that what happened to Luke was a hate crime because he's gay, which I have questions on that too. Because like, is Luke gay? That's unclear, or was that just used as an excuse to, for the principal to be less severe with punishment? And another side yet to David is that after like when Anna like is on to him, like we see clearly like he's becoming more violent with his approach, like with the whole gunfight sequence, and like him like killing everyone, including at the restaurant. He shoots Kristen and then uses the grenades to like kill everyone, or potentially leave survivors. That's unclear. But yeah, clearly though, like he always has an answer to get himself out of situations. And with David, like he kind of fights like the Terminator, kind of reminds me of that, because clearly like in all of his fight sequences he's very like quick with his moves, but is also very like brutal too. So, and he has like the very stoic facial expression. So like he's like being controlled or something like that. Like probably because of the experiment that he was under, but yeah, like he doesn't mess around when it comes to those situations. And also what I mentioned with the opening sequence, like it was quite interesting, like where we see like the first shot of like David jogging. Like we only see the backside of him, like as he's carrying his backpack, and then like it cuts to the titles, like with the score, and then we go to see him arriving at the door to as Laura like greets him and all that stuff. So I thought, yeah, like that was interesting. And then as that sequence played out, there was no score until like David is alone in Caleb's room. So I would say like as a note, like as a suggestion, like I would say like probably like show David running like how it was shot and then cut to maybe like Laura and Spencer like having their brief conversation before he, leaves, and then have David arrive, and then he's like, "Oh, hello," and all that stuff, and then cut to the titles with the score. I feel like for me that would have been more effective, but it's neither here or there. But that would be my suggestion. I also like to, yeah, the bar fight sequence. So we see how like with Luke, he clearly gets bullied at school, and which shows that, yeah, like people in high school in movies, like they're very brutal. So clearly, like we see, yeah, David, he picks up Luke because he notices at home that he has like the injuries with all that stuff, but he makes excuse, "Oh, a football hit me," which clearly did not happen. So David wants Luke to point out the guys that beat him up, which he did, and then David decides to follow the bullies on the road as they head to the bar. And Luke kind of finds it strange, and then like David's like, "Oh, I'm gonna get a drink. If you wanna come with me, that's your choice." And then of course Luke follows him in, and then the boys are like, "Oh, what is he doing here?" And then they order like their drinks, where I believe, yeah, David orders a fire shot, which looks like tomato juice, and Luke has a Coke. And it's funny that like David, he decides to order like the girlfriend's blow shots and the guy's cosmopolitan drinks, because it seemed like clear that he wanted to confront the bullies. I guess because he wants to like help out the family at the end of the day. And because I wondered though, like if Luke did not enter the bar, like would he have like fought the bullies like right away, or maybe like would he like order drinks for the table as shown in the movie, which leads to the fight scene. Again, I feel like either way, like he would have still confronted them. And it was hilarious that like one of the bullies throws the Cosmo drink like at David's face, which clearly pisses him off. And then in retaliation, David throws the fire shot at the guy's face, which clearly stings. And then that leads to the fight sequence. So it was like clearly it's one of the first scenes that we see like David like using his skills from the military to fight off the bullies and to defend Luke. So yeah, it shows don't mess with David. He's not fooling around. And then also too, a sequence I liked was, yeah, the whole party scene. So I just wanted to say first, it was kind of weird for Laura to get Anna to invite David to a party, because like it's all like her friends and like people close to her age, and obviously like David's not gonna fit in. But yeah, I thought that was weird. But anyways, back to the scene. So clearly like he tries to look cool to impress everyone, which works like on Anna's friend Kristen. That leads to like a sex scene like after he slams her ex boyfriend against the wall, which smashes like a photo of hers. And yeah, so it seems like, oh, everyone likes David, but like, Anna like finds it weird and all that stuff because she doesn't know him. I don't blame her. And I loved, yeah, like too with the lighting, the multicolored lighting, like as like, everyone's having a good time. Like we see like, yeah, like there's like a neon like feel to it, like as it's mixed like with the techno esque score. And then yeah, I loved, yeah, David, like he pretty much smokes the same like joint that's shared with everyone, which looking at it today, like, post pandemic is certainly not a good look, but hey, I guess it wasn't a concern at the time. And I love too like how that leads to David and Anna like bonding like after she kind of has like an exchange with Zeke. And I think yeah, if you see her, she kind of like opens up like maybe like she thinks oh he's not as bad as she thought he would be, and she offers like to make like a compilation CD which he plays during the final fight sequence. And also too, I also liked David and Luke's relationship. So we see like with David and Anna, like it's kind of like strained like until like the party sequence, but then it goes back to that once she has suspicions. And then, but with David and Luke's relationship is interesting because he after like we see Luke getting bullied and all that stuff, he pretty much befriends Luke. He gives Luke advice pretty much to defend himself and gives him like a butterfly knife, which kind of reminds me of butterfly knife that they used in the movie Action Jackson with Carl Weathers, which I do recommend you guys check it out. But essentially, yeah, with that movie, one of the bad guys, the henchman, carries like a butterfly knife. So seeing that like with this movie kind of reminded me of that. So, which kind of makes you wonder, like, why is he carrying a butterfly knife? Because, like, we see, yeah, like, when they're carving, like, the pumpkins, like, he pretty much decides to toss the parents' knives, which are pretty stale, and then uses his butterfly knife, which obviously, is more effective. And I would say like that exchange, the gun exchange with David, yeah, like Craig and Higgins, kind of introduces sort of a different side to David than was shown prior to that scene. Because it seemed clear that David wants to rob them and all this stuff under false pretenses. And yeah, he kills them. And pretty much takes the guns, and like I guess no one like suspects it because it's in a remote area where this happens. But then I guess Anna like she kind of claims oh like he that David killed him, even though he clearly did. But I just wonder if Anna like you know how do you know that he killed them, like did she see them there at the site? Well, clearly not. But there could have been like anyone else that killed Craig and Higgins, but whatever. And yeah, the gunfight sequence. Yeah, like I would say I think that's probably like one of like the I would say prominent action scenes of the film because there's a lot of gunfire exchange between Major Carver and his group with the KPG versus David. Because I loved how, like, after when they arrive and try to find where he is, we see, like, the slow mo shot of, like, David dropping the basket of laundry. And then he slowly, like, grabs, like, the handgun and then starts shooting everyone. And yeah, it was interesting, like, for David to get shot in the leg, which creates a limp that he has for the rest of the movie. And I guess no surprise, really, that after when stuff is revealed, he kills Laura, which I have some thoughts on that in the low light section. But, I mean, yeah, like he has to cover his tracks, but it's kind of like unfortunate. And then also too later he kills Spencer by causing a car collision and shooting him in the chest, which is unfortunate. And we see clearly like he has no remorse like for his actions. And it was like interesting like before he kills Laura that he said, "Oh, there were too many complications as to why he stayed longer than he anticipated to be," which I have thoughts on in the next section, but yeah. And also too, I was relieved that after when that whole sequence went down, he with Major Carver he finds Anna first in a restaurant just before David arrives, because I loved to like the tracking shot as Anna and Carver were leaving. We see David pull up in this green minivan, which has blood on the window, which clearly he killed the driver. And then that's when you see, yeah, him killing Kristen and then killing like everyone there. So yeah. And then also too, I love, yeah, the final fight sequence at school, because with the mix of the production design, like the lighting, the visuals, like the music, it kind of makes it very cool and fascinating to watch. Like I like the moment when we see Carver standing like against a bunch of mirrors. Kind of reminded me of that final fight sequence with Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon. I would recommend you guys check that out if you haven't already. So probably like the filmmakers use that as an homage to put in this movie. And the whole sequence kind of has like a whole like cat and mouse thing going on between Anna and David, because we see like Anna leaving the boots to think, she was standing there, and then like she shoots David, but clearly he's still around as he stabs her like in the leg and starts choking her until Luke intervenes and stabs him with the butterfly knife. And then it was funny that David he dies like next to the grave as the fog is like covering him. Yeah, I thought, yeah, that was quite fascinating. And lastly, like the cameo by Candice Patton. For those you may know, she's in The Flash, and I guess the CW universe as Iris, because she plays here Sergeant Calloway, who talks to Anna over the phone as she, is contacting the military base to find information on David. So that was solid. Now let's go on to lowlights. So the first question, like after like everything went down, like what was David's intention? It seemed clear that he wanted to pay his respects to the family because he had friendship with Caleb and wanted to, I guess, help out a bit. But we see like clearly he's hiding secrets, because he calls like a surgeon that Anna like overhears, and then he decides to kill people like after like when like Anna calls the military base to find info on him. So I'm just wondering though, like if he had like a timeline, why didn't he just make an excuse to leave? Like he could have just said, "Oh, like I have to visit family, or I'm visiting like other family members, like of the soldiers maybe that got killed." Because honestly though, like it's his fault that he stayed longer. Because I get that he's on the run from Carver and his group, but again, like this all could have been prevented if he just kept moving. And I wonder too, like, why does he want to use a plastic surgeon? Because I feel like it could also draw like attention too. Because since he wants to kill everyone and keep his tracks, like he'll probably like kill the surgeon, which could draw attention, and then all that stuff. And also too, I wonder though, why does Luke decide to reveal Anna's suspicions of David? Like honestly, that doesn't make sense. Like I get that Luke likes David as a friend or as a member of the family, but we don't know David. Like come on, like it shows that Luke is very naive. And yeah, honestly, like if my brother did that, then there's gonna be a very serious conversation. But my brother would never do that to me, hopefully. Um, Also, too, but why does Laura decide to run inside the house after this gunfight is still happening? Because clearly David is inside the house. And she kind of has suspicions, but sees that David is holding a knife in his hand like he's about to stab her. Because honestly, though, like if she did what she did, she probably would have been alive. My opinion. Maybe like he would have killed her, like try to kill her eventually when she's outside. But I felt like, with her going inside the house could have been more preventable. Also, too, the school maze, like it looks very expensive for a high school budget because like it looks like a cool maze, something you would see like in a very like established like haunted house type situation, but for high school, I'm like, no, I don't buy this. And also, I wondered too, like, is David bionic? Because I think though, like the filmmakers wanted to make it a bit ambiguous, but at the same time, it kind of leaves you with questions. Because we see, yeah, like he clearly survives at the end after getting like stabbed and shot, but still has the limp. So I'm just wondering, with the experience, does it have limitations? Because I felt like it could have been a bit more clear, but I get that like you want to follow like maybe a specific runtime or to get to the point of the story. So probably they didn't want to say too much, but maybe I don't know. There could be like a short film or maybe address in the sequel like the full extent to his experiment. And lastly, like that group photo that we see of David and Caleb with the other soldiers, it looks Photoshop. Let's go on to trivia. So there's a lot of facts with this movie. I'm not gonna reveal all of them, but here's a select few. So let's start with Dan Stevens. So of Adam Wingard, he deliberately decided to cast a left field choice for David. So he chose Dan Stevens because like with Dan Stevens, like he was known for Downton Abbey, it was very likable, and I guess with casting someone against type could work and make it more believable. And with Dan Stevens, apparently he was completely emaciated when he first met Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett because he lost 30 pounds for a walk in the tombstones. They clearly wanted him for the role, but were worried about his performance because he had to be a certain physique. Adam Wingard mentioned that Dan Stevens looked like Christian Bale in The Machinist, but wanted to look like Christian Bale in Batman Begins. So, however, they gave him the role after Stevens promised that he would work out and bulk up. And so after like he was cast, Dan Stevens, he was assigned personal trainers and dietitians to begin the physical transformation for the role. He worked out daily for 2 hours, even during shooting, eventually putting 25 pounds of muscle and building 6-pack abs for his shirtless scene. The scene was scheduled in the last week of principal photography so that he got as much time as possible to build up his physique. He was cast just a month before principal photography began, and the shoot was 2 months, giving him about 3 months to prep. So Dan Stevens said it was the first time in his career that he had done serious bodybuilding for a role and was thrilled by the aesthetic appearance of his body in the film. He said it allowed him to break his former image as a chubby and restrained English gentleman in Downton Abbey and surprise audiences by crafting an image of a shirtless macho soldier. Wingard pointed out that Steven's body shape significantly changes from scene to scene. This is because the film was shot out of sequence and Stevens was still training throughout the shoot. So he appeared frail in some scenes and very muscular in others. Wingard and Barrett said that Steven's shirtless scene was one of the most important scenes in the movie because they knew it was going to be a major selling point and a surefire trailer shot that they spent more time shooting the scene than any other one. Wingard said that he wanted to, quote, sexually objectify and fetishize Dan Stevens' shirtless body in the shot as it went with the playful nature of the movie, where the audience was subversively being asked to oogle at the body of the bad boy character. They scheduled that scene as late as possible because they wanted his body in optimum condition. So in prep for that scene, Steven shaved his chest and tanned his body so that his muscle definition could be seen. And in addition, Wingard said that to deepen the muscle definition further, the trainers had Stevens do a trick where he, quote, he did not consume any food or water for the day, and then just before the shot, he drank a Diet Coke and did 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups. This tightened up the muscles and made his veins stand out, giving him the super ripped appearance that the filmmakers wanted. The shot was then subsequently used in trailers and publicity materials for the film. Wowza. Yeah, like I said, like he clearly transformed with this movie, not just like acting wise in terms of the type of role, but also to on a more physical level. And I would say, yeah, like props to Dan Stevens, because I'm sure not everyone is willing to go that far, but like clearly like he's very dedicated to the role. Also, too, the script was written in less than 8 weeks. I'm like, okay. Also, too, like in an interview in 2018 with Red Letter Media, screenwriter Simon Barrett talked about a original, earlier, different story and script ideas and versions of the guests. The first version of the script, which he worked on years earlier but never finished, was about a soldier suffering from PTSD who killed another soldier while they are in war because they hated each other. And after he comes back, he goes to visit his family pretending like he was his friend, while instead planning on killing them too. Barrett also said that in an earlier draft he wrote after director Adam Wingard told him about the story idea he had for the film, David was more of a cyborg who was rebuilt after he was injured in combat, and how originally the story took place in foggy, isolated areas of Pacific Northwest instead of New Mexico. I thought interesting. So I guess, yeah, like if he's supposedly meant to be like a cyborg, I felt like, yeah, like I said, when it came to that aspect of the film, it could have been more clear, but I get they wanted to make it ambiguous, similar to like with the Halloween films done by John Carpenter, and how Michael Myers, like, he pretty much survives like every time he gets killed off. So I figure, yeah, that's the direction what the filmmakers went, but at the same time it was kind of like a bit frustrating. Also too, I'll say final note, some fans suggested that David is Caleb, which is not true because 1, David and Caleb are shown on a picture together, which proves they're not the same person. 2, when David is attacked by Major Carver and co., he admits to Laura that he really did know Caleb and that they were in the same program. And 3, despite what people have said, David never admits or indicates that his face is altered, because in the scene where he's on the phone with a surgeon, he is talking about a new face and fingerprints. Some viewers often mishear or misunderstand the scene and think David is actually talking about already having a plastic surgery done to his face, which makes no sense because before the shoot starts, Major Carver shows a picture of David to Laura and his face is not different, which is probably the reason why that theory was suggested in the first place. Which was interesting because I never honestly thought about that while seeing the movie, but Yeah, but it's clear that David, he wants to change himself to evade capture. So, which makes me wonder, like, should the sequel actually happen? Are we actually going to see, like, Dan Stevenson role? Or if it's going to be a different actor that suggests that he got surgery done years later. All right, lastly, I usually ask this question: should this movie be rediscovered? And I say absolutely yes. Because I loved, yeah, the 80s influence with the visuals, the John Carpenter type score, but definitely feels modern. Lighting choices, I loved how it has a neon feel with the multicolors. I liked it's very like engaging as a thriller, but as an action scene, it's very grounded because we see those scenes have purpose than just being, there for the sake of entertainment. The performances, yeah, from the cast, especially Dan Stevens and Maika Monroe, stood out. And also loved how it has like an indie slash alternative soundtrack. All right, so that pretty much concludes this episode of the podcast. So you could follow myself on Twitter and Instagram at Nomfanelo. You could follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at RDMoviesPod, and you can use the hashtag RDMoviesPod. You could answer the featured question on Spotify. You could like, share, and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred platform that's available. And you could submit questions, comments, and suggestions by email, which is rediscoveredmovies@gmail.com. I want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the podcast. Until next time.